Good afternoon, everybody. I wish to start this afternoon by showing you these images of Le Corbusier. These images illustrate for us the inherent duality of the role of the architect. Is he an artist or is he an engineer? Is he creative or practical? Architects are often open-minded, artistic, creative, but on the other hand, the buildings they create need to be stable, well-organized, and I think it's quite contradictory. The process from going to point A to Z, the first step towards the final product, towards the final building, I think that process is also pretty contradictory. Because in the beginning we receive this brief, which is not always very inspiring. We can ask ourselves, is it tiring or inspiring? So how does one retain some of the creativity and the fun in order to get to the final goal, create a unique building? We have analyzed our process of conception and we have discovered several phases. The first one for us is we employ an extreme attention to the site. This natural condition can be nature, a beautiful forest or a beautiful hill, but it can also be a very urban situation. So we analyze the site, we analyze its direct environment and its larger surroundings. And what's very important in there is the personal experience, our personal experience, we mingle with that. So the first impressions you have, it may make you think of a movie you saw or an exhibit you did last week or maybe a childhood memory. We think that these first impressions are very important and they give you a first direction, maybe a concept to work with. This we enrich afterwards with various project factors that come out of the programmatic analysis. These are often too very contradictory. And all these elements, we bring them together to a point of overlap. And in the end, we add another layer, which is kind of an organizational system. We bring in some kind of a logic to find some kind of a structure. And these elements all together configure some kind of a project matrix, which we like to play with. And this helps us to come up with a valid project proposal. The last thing we think is very important in this whole conceptual process is when you finally get to this point where you find you have found a valid project proposal, you have to be able to communicate it. It's very important to make people understand what you have in your head. If you're capable of doing that, you are capable of gaining the trust of people, of gaining their enthusiasm, and they will let you move forward with what you are having in your mind. And that's very important. People need to understand it, so that's why we like to create a very legible architecture. I will first try to illustrate this conception, our process, conceptualization process, by explaining you a little bit the Hong Kong Design Institute. This was an international anonymous competition in which we participated in 2006. And the first questions we asked ourselves were, how do we create a space that serves creativity without competing with it? How do you create several design departments, because it was a design campus? How do you give each department a different character, but they still need to be connected? This was the site of the Hong Kong DI. It's situated in the Kyu Keng Leng area. You get there in about 20 minutes from Hong Kong Central. The station is Chung Kwan O. And there's also a bus station. And nature was very present also. As you can see, we had a beautiful view on Junk Bay. And behind the residential towers, you see the beautiful hills of Hong Kong. So the main activities present at that time were residential and commercial. We mingled with those first impressions all the project contradictories. For example, the client wanted different departments that all had their own identity, but they needed to have some kind of a synergy between them also. And what we could have done then was putting all these elements together, create a project that was merely determined by the urban constraints. There were a lot of them, and one of the biggest one was the height limit of 55-meter height. And then we could have just applied some kind of a facade onto it and have more of a facade architecture. All this would have created quite an ordinary building. What we liked to do was play with the program, challenge the brief, and we divided the program. We tried to look for which functions needed to be separated from each other, which ones needed to be shared, which ones needed to be linked with the public. And that's how we created a project that for us challenged not only the brief, but also the current urban situation of Hong Kong, where you often have podiums where people mix and mingle, but then they all isolate themselves in the towers. So for us, it was all about creating this moment up in the air and having a base that was very much about porosity and where people could go in and discover. I'll show you this movie first.
6 mois après notre installation, on a choisi de participer à un concours d'architecture internationale qui était celui de la création de l'Institut de Design de Hong Kong. Ce bâtiment participera au développement culturel et au développement des formations professionnalisantes des jeunes hongkongais, avec une ouverture sur l'international importante. Fin 2006, quand on a été lauréat du concours, on a fait le choix de localiser notre équipe sur place. Donc nous-mêmes sommes allés habiter 5 mois sur place pour développer les études et faire face aux clients.
Le bâtiment se trouve dans le quartier de Tue Keng Leng, donc c'est au nord-est de Hong Kong. C'est un quartier plutôt à vocation résidentielle et commerciale.
La particularité du contexte urbain hongkongais, c'est la hiérarchisation et justement les contrastes qui sont opérés entre l'échelle piétonne, l'échelle de l'habitat, l'échelle des commerces et l'échelle des activités. Tout ça fonctionne un peu par strates, par couches, ce qui crée des désordres urbains un peu palpables et qui manquent parfois justement de synergie entre les éléments. On trouvait que le bâtiment était une opportunité de recréer des nouveaux rapports urbains pour rompre avec une certaine habitude de hiérarchisation assez radicale des fonctions.
Pour ce concours, on a utilisé une métaphore, donc la feuille blanche qui est le moyen de base pour chaque designer. En fait, c'est ce qu'il utilise au début de chaque mission pour commencer à créer quelque chose. Donc c'est un peu l'idée de l'éducation qui supporte le monde des idées.
L'idée d'utiliser une métaphore en architecture, pour nous, est un moyen intéressant de se désapproprier le projet et de pouvoir le transmettre. Pouvoir faire en sorte qu'une autre personne, un utilisateur, un client, raconte l'histoire du projet, le comprenne, juste en expliquant les raisons de sa composition volumétrique.
La structure des tours est en acier treillis et donc porte non seulement les dalles en béton armé des tours en elles-mêmes, mais également la structure de toute la plateforme qui est donc en saillie par rapport aux tours. Et donc on voit à travers la façade ici les poutres dont les diagonales transpercent tout l'espace afin donc de porter ces grands porte-à-faux.
La composition même de l'architecture induit des qualités naturelles. On peut voir la grande plateforme qui protège naturellement des ensoleillements ou même des pluies fortes, puisqu'à Hong Kong le climat est quand même assez rude, humide et il pleut très fortement régulièrement. Et en même temps, le bâtiment, par les différents décalages de chaque tour ou les vides créés entre les volumes, crée une sorte de fraîcheur naturelle avec des courants d'air qui sont créés. Donc il s'agissait de composer le bâtiment selon des contraintes très très fortes qui étaient celles de la hauteur, puisque nous étions plafonnés à 55 mètres, ce qui crée un rapport d'échelle assez complexe. On voulait que notre bâtiment soit une résonance à ces éléments structurants de la ville, qui sont pour nous la verticalité, mais aussi le paysage. Cette plateforme qu'on a véritablement soulevée du sol pour la poser en lévitation sur les tours, elle permet de décupler les vues depuis la bibliothèque vers les collines, mais aussi vers la baie de Hong Kong. On a fortement insisté auprès du maître d'ouvrage pour le convaincre que ce bâtiment n'avait pas besoin de plus que ce qu'il était, c'est-à-dire de s'exprimer au-delà des matériaux qu'on proposait, qui étaient béton, verre, acier, les matériaux essentiels pour concevoir ce bâtiment. Ce qui était très difficile puisque la culture locale impose souvent à ce que les choses soient assez fortement renchéries de décoration, de maquillage, de suppléments qui rajoute des couches supplémentaires permanentes. Et donc nous, on a plutôt insisté pour travailler avec les entreprises, pour obtenir justement une finition la plus adéquate possible et révéler le squelette du bâtiment. On se trouve dans ce bâtiment de manière quasiment systématique, dans des espaces semi-intérieurs, semi-extérieurs. L'implantation de ce grand escalator qui relie les éléments, une sorte presque de clin d'œil à ce contexte de la ville hongkongaise. Ce bâtiment permet d'être complètement pénétré et de laisser la ville continuer à travers lui. Et donc ça a été une réelle interrogation de la part des utilisateurs. Comment est-ce qu'on peut se sentir dans une université proprement dite avec un bâtiment aussi dilaté, aussi ouvert? Et nous, on leur a expliqué que c'était vraiment la clé de la réussite de ce programme.
Ça se passe vraiment en fait comme nous on avait espéré, dans le sens où ils s'approprient tous les différents espaces et l'utilisent dans tous les sens. Et c'est vraiment comme ça qu'on l'avait conçu.
The next project I want to share with you is the Versatile Tower design in New York. I was living during 2 years in New York, exploring this fascinating city, living not too far from Central Park in the Upper West Side, a vibrant city with a beautiful skyline, day but at night as well. I worked there in the offices of Richard Meyer, and so walked to work every day and discovered the city, New York City grid and the New York City blocks. And our life there inspired us to reflect on the existing urban fabric. So we decided to participate in this skyscraper competition. And the site is the West Side Railroad, West Side Rail Yard, excuse me, which was at that time very much spoken about because it was a site where the Jets decided to build their stadium. So our first thinking was, let's create a continuity of the existing urban fabric throughout our site. So just let's continue the existing urban fabric, use the same height, and create a mixed program onto the site. But we think that the architect also has a social responsibility and needs to reflect on life quality versus the city density. So that's why we preferred piling up the same floor area in a vertical way and thus creating a park called West Park, a pendant of Central Park. So we created this park for this district and for its inhabitants. With this design, we aim to provide a vertical reproduction of its horizontal environment. It was made up of a mixed program of squares, streets, public places, and landscape, just as you can find in a normal horizontal city. And so this vertical transcription defines a kind of a new urban fabric, and it's brought to life just as in a horizontal city by people walking from one street to another, through the gardens, through the public spaces. So the user, by working or living or circulating in this vertical way, they discover a kind of a new way of living, a vertical way of living, but it's actually quite close to the horizontal way of living. So this is how our project looked like, because we like to think from the inside of the building and show on the outside how it's organized inside. So that's how you see this. These facades are showing a little bit how the streets are inside, how it's organized at day, but at night also we lit up the streets just as normal streets are lit up at night. And we think buildings like this, if you create them in a city, they really become a landmark. They really become important and contribute to the visual culture of the city. So we propose, for example, that the building could contribute in showing, for example, if there's a Roy Lichtenstein exhibit at the MoMA, then this building could show it to all the people living around. Next project is the International Conference Center in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso in Africa. Burkina Faso is a country that is relatively peaceful. If you look at all the countries that surrounding this country, they have quite some political tensions, and Burkina Faso often has a pacifying role in this. Ouagadougou is a quite random city. It's quite a warm climate, of course, with a lot of drought, and quite some rural areas that are very close to the city center. City center quite chaotic, with a lot of cars, motorcycles, bikes, all mingling among each other, quite chaotic. But we did feel when visiting it, it was a very warm atmosphere. People are very welcoming, and that's what we wanted to feel in our project. So we based our project on an ancient tradition, which is the calabash fruit. It used to be cut in half and offered to people as a welcoming sign, to give water to welcome the people. And so we used this as the main inspiration for our building, which we thought was appropriate since this Congress Center had the goal to receive all the surrounding countries to talk about peace. The complex was situated in a large park, and we proposed a building that was made up of 3 buildings that were linked with one another. The main one had the auditorium of about 1,000 people, and then you had a VIP pavilion and a banquet pavilion. And the architecture was mainly formed with pure volumes, with soft curves and circular elements. And the 3 pavilions were linked together by circular infinite pathways which communicate some kind of a fluidity. We worked with the idea of a double skin. The 3 pavilions were wrapped with a double skin, which were referenced to, the calabash fruit, which was often decorated. They painted on it. So we provided a perforated, decorated concrete skin around each pavilion so they could protect from the heat. And we also provided a huge parasol protecting from the sun and the rain. And this composition of the 3 calabash and the main roof provided some cross ventilation which could contribute to giving coolness to the users. The next project I want to share with you is Lagunas Park project here in Hong Kong. We were asked by MTR to look at their Lagunas Park development, which is situated on the east side of Hong Kong. LOHAS is the abbreviation of Living of Health and Sustainability. And this project was more a research and development project we worked on for a year. MTR asked us to have a look at this development. At the time when we were commissioned, it was already being built, part of it. And they asked us to look how we could apply sustainability to this site. So we looked at Hong Kong and said, well, Hong Kong has a lot of open space, a lot of beautiful nature. You should try to get this nature into your site, because the site is surrounded by some quite beautiful nature. There's the water, there was some recreational green area around, there was also a junk peak. So we said, why don't you try to look a little bit behind or above your site boundaries and try to get nature into your site. So we encouraged them to get the nature from the mountains through the site towards the water. So this is the plan of the site when we started to work on it. So all the pink was already constructed. There were about 50 towers that needed to be erected on the site. The blue was under construction and the green was not designed yet. So we told them, let's create this green corridor that goes through your site in order to enhance biodiversity on your site. And we did this climate study on the site, which showed that there were zones where it was too hot or too shady or too windy because of the composition of the towers. They were sometimes blocking off the wind or redirecting all the wind through a certain spot. So we proposed to them to create a couple of nests throughout the site, nests that would be there to protect the people and to encourage people to use more the outdoor space. And these nests would then, for example, protect them from the wind or protect them from the sun. But these nests were also there to attract little fauna and flora, so we could increase the real presence of nature in the site. Because we think in general in Hong Kong, all the landscaped parts are quite manicured, quite artificial. So we said, in a place that's about living of health and sustainability, let's get real nature into the site. So we worked for a year on this. We had a whole booklet of proposals. I'll just show a couple of them to you. First one is that we proposed to them to make the buildings on site sustainable. We thought it was quite essential, if you have a sustainable site, that the buildings on it are sustainable too. So we proposed to them to envelope the existing buildings in some kind of a second skin. It's a little bit like putting on a jacket. So this skin could give the opportunity to create pocket parks or greenhouses for certain apartments, and would also serve as some kind of an iconic image, which could have been seen from Cross Bay Link. We also developed these micro-architectures in different scales, not only as large, but at different scales. So this is one of the pavilions, smaller pavilions, where people could shelter for the rain or for the sun. They could take some information on the ecological approach of the site. And this is the wind tower we developed on site, which had the purpose to diminish the temperature at the base of the tower by 3 degrees Celsius, just by creating this natural ventilation. There were solar panels here, which would make this turbine here function, and this would create natural ventilation, and this would lower the temperature outside. So all these features would have encouraged people to enjoy outside living. And that's how the tower looked like. I don't have that much time anymore. I think I'll cut short. 2 more projects. This one is the West Kowloon Air Clouds. It's a proposal we thought about since Hong Kong is part of all the cosmopolitan cities that have very dense activity and have problems of air pollution. And as we all know, plants can have a quite purifying function. So we were saying, okay, there's a West Kowloon Cultural District who is located right in front of Hong Kong Island, which has the ambition of creating a place that's well equipped, open to everyone, and it announces at the same time the city's wish to become an important cultural place. But has anybody, or Foster, thought about how treating the existing air protection buildings that are positioned on the site? So we were inspired by a design that is used to improve air quality in apartments for residents. We said maybe we can use this on a larger scale. So we proposed to wrap the extraction building into these air bubbles. These air bubbles would be filled up with plants who could help purifying the air. And we said maybe we can just plant a couple of them in different shapes and different forms, and they can all have different functions. Some can be purifying, others can be botanical, others can be recreational for holding weddings or other events. And that's the way they look like. So we thought these are not only helping Hong Kong to purify its air, but they can also serve as some kind of an iconic thing positioned on West Kowloon, which shows whole Hong Kong Island. Hong Kong is doing something about its air quality. I'm just going to check. I think this is going to be the last one. It's a mixed-use project we did in the northern part of France. The building is implanted in a master plan that was designed by OMA, by Rem Koolhaas. And the volume was pretty much set. It was situated on partially on this boulevard with quite some traffic. and also in this street, which was a little bit more intimate, a little bit less traffic. So we worked with two strategies. The first one is to work with a module that we declined in several ways according to the exposure of the facades and according to the functions that were behind the facade. For example, it was developed in a quite smooth way where we had offices behind, so the office building was here, giving out on the traffic boulevard. And when it came down to the residences, we declined this module, we deformed it, we changed it, and we created a double skin on the south facade so people could have terraces behind this double skin. And on the north side, it was very much more closed, so the building was protected from the cold. The second principle was this green footprint. We wanted to give back to the building the green footprint that we took away from nature by building the building. So we added this green on the building. So this is the facade. So this is the office tower, and these are the residential apartments. So office tower, treatment quite smoothly. Residences, much more porous facade. And the north facade, much more closed, so to prevent the cold from getting in. To separate the several functions, we added greenery, as I said before. So between the offices and the residences, we added a greenhouse, not only to add green onto the site, but also to help this greenhouse warm the air in the offices in winter or cool it down by opening it up and creating natural ventilation through the offices. And then we added a green vertical garden and a communal garden here in the residences. Yeah, so this is the vertical and communal garden. We created these vertical gardens, not a very expensive vertical garden designed by Patrick Blanc, but it's a pretty basic thing. We provided on every terrace a planter who has plants inside, and these plants are provided by rainwater by a drop-down system. So we collected the rainwater on the green roofs and it dropped down so the tenants don't have to do any maintenance or giving water to the plants. And this is how it looks like today. So we opened it 1 month ago. You're seeing here, so the south facade, which is much more porous and creates this filter and this kind of intimacy with the balconies behind. And this is in the offices on the head of the building, giving out on the boulevard. The greenhouse, separating the offices from the residences. And again, this more residential facade with these balconies that each have the planter with the plants they still need to grow. Some views of the balconies between the double skin and in some corridor. Some picture in one of the duplex apartments. We created quite some diversity in the typologies of the apartments, and on the upper floors we had some duplex apartments. And this is a view in the lobby where we added some natural materials. It's a Taichung City Cultural Center competition we participated in recently, and we unfortunately lost, but we do think it was a good idea, so we wish to present it to you anyways. The location of the site was in the perimeter of this huge park, and it was quite an interesting situation because the building really needed to create this link between the park and an urban situation. And on the second hand, it was also creating this kind of an entry, this kind of a gateway to this new area where there was going to be a convention center and the famous Taiwan Tower. The questions we asked ourselves were, how can one create two distinct institutions that make up for a unified identity? Because the program of this cultural center was on the one hand a library and on the other hand a fine arts museum. How can we conceive an urban building within the perimeter of a park? So we went through this whole exploration of different design approaches, and in the end we thought that the thing to do was create two different elements, but they needed to have a link between them. So this is the final proposal we worked with two distinct buildings, and they had between them some kind of a linking element, a tectonic element, that was not only creating a link between the two programmatic elements, but also creating the link in this way between the park and the city. So we created this porous project so that the park and the urban situation could communicate, and it was this canopy that was linking the two buildings and the park and the city. And this canopy was kind of making the transcription between the horizontal character of the park and the vertical character of the city. And underneath this canopy, we created a public plaza, which was really the entrance plaza to both of the buildings. So it's this recurrent duality that became really an inspiration for us through this project, and which we pushed very much further also in the organizing of the buildings. So to us, a library is a program that can be considered as being quite extroverted, because it's a place where people share knowledge, where people distribute information, in the contrary to a museum, which we think is more of an introverted place, a place of collection and protection. So we worked on these two dualities through the organization. So we put the vertical circulation in the middle so people could have a look from inside to the outside. But for the museum, all the circulation was put in the periphery, and we had this light well in the middle of the building. So people were looking on the outside from the library, and people were looking to the artwork on the inside in the museum. So we conceived both buildings a little bit as one being the stone and the other one being the crystal. So we felt this even in the facade treatment. The stone building was merely in concrete, while the crystal building was a glass building. But in order to cool it down, we had a continuous flowing of water onto the facade to cool the whole building down. So this is how it looked like in the ending. You see very well the transition between the park and the city through this canopy. This canopy housed several functions. Sometimes they were vegetal, greenery. Sometimes they were terraces. Other times they were filled with solar panels. A view on the inside of the museum, and to end with a view of the lobby in the library. Thank you very much.
Okay, you've shown us 3 projects from Hong Kong, and you had almost a decade now of engagement with this city from very concrete to very speculative projects. And I understand you've established an office in Hong Kong as well. If you were allowed one wish, the project that you wish one of the big developers from Hong Kong would come to you with, what would that project be?
You mean one of the 3? One of the...
Well...
Or another one?
Anyone with lots of money and lots of land and an open mind.
I think what would be really a dream was to have a client that in Hong Kong that understands our strong will to break with Hong Kong mentality. We think people indeed are not open-minded enough, or maybe not people, but the developers anyway are not open-minded enough. And we think by having built the Hong Kong Design Institute that we have proved that you can think differently and make a building that is different in Hong Kong and still functions. So we would really like to be given a chance to build over the West Kowloon clouds. I think it's a very exciting project for Hong Kong, and it's a quite modest one. I think my partner would say, I want to do a skyscraper in Hong Kong. So just, anyway, we would love to continue working here. We like it very much. That's the most important thing.
Great, thank you. I think many architects in Hong Kong would join you in that wish. Okay, thank you very much.